Hey everybody, this is Kendall from the Recording Lounge podcast, and today I'm doing a short video on something called the stacking myth. Now, what is the stacking myth? The idea is, let's say you only have one microphone to your name, and you record everything with it. You record lead vocals and backing vocals and acoustic guitar and piano and electric guitar and drums and, bass cab and saxophone or whatever, and you record everything at that microphone. The fear that people have is, let's say that microphone has a little bit of a boost at 1K and maybe a little bit of a boost at 4K. The fear is that when you combine all of those tracks recorded with that microphone, your lead vocal and your backing vocal, etc., and all those tracks, you're going to have this abnormal sort of boost in those regions where that microphone has those boosts. And, you'll solo up tracks and you're not going to really hear it, and you're going to say, well, that sounds fine. But when you combine them, you're going to get this sort of like abnormal buildup there. And I'm here to tell you, thankfully, that is a complete myth. It's not true. And I'm going to prove that to you by this little experiment. And what we've got here is 14 tracks of drums that I recorded at my studio. I'm just going to play these really quick. And how we're going to test this is we're going to use an EQ on every single channel of the drums with the exact same curve, okay, like this. And notice this isn't necessarily a great sounding move to do on drums. Okay, you're boosting 6 dB at 4K and cutting 6 dB of low end at 100 hertz. So this, thins it out and makes it sound a little bit harsh. So we're going to add this exact same EQ across every single drum channel versus putting one EQ, just doing 6 dB, same exact preset of each of these boosts and cuts on the drum bus. So the idea is to prove that this 6 dB, these tracks, these aren't adding together that EQ. It's not like, 6 dB plus 6 dB plus 6 dB. It's not like that. That's not how it works. So I'm going to prove that this is the exact same thing. So what we're going to do, we have all these routed to the drum bus, and the drum bus is now routed to each of these audio tracks. So we're going to turn on all of these EQs first, all the individual drum tracks, and we're going to record it to this EQ on every track, audio track. So check this out. Now we're going to take those drums, we're going to bypass that EQ, and we're going to put just one EQ, just one instance, just doing one time on the drum bus itself. We're going to record this to this other track, EQ on the bus. Now, the best way to tell if two things are identical is to do a null test. So what that means is we're going to take both tracks, we're going to solo them up, and we're going to flip the polarity on one. So this is a perfect inversion of polarity, 180 degrees. And so I'm going to pull this up. So I've already got this flipped. So check this out. We're going to hear sound on this track and on this track. But when you play them together, they completely cancel out. They are identical. Okay, they're completely identical. So this proves that, by putting all of these instances of EQ, you're not getting a boost. Okay, there's nothing happening on the master bus here. You're not summing those EQs where they're adding each other and exacerbating the problems that exist and sort of, taking that one tone and multiplying it across the entire mix. Okay, so thankfully that's not how it works. So don't feel bad about using that one mic on everything. Now, I do recommend using different mics on things just so you can get different flavors for different things and create an interesting sounding recording. But still, if you only have one microphone, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. This is also a great argument for using master bus EQ and bus EQ and sort of taking what some people would say a top-down approach, or mixing big to small, as I like to say. So where you add a little bit of EQ on the master bus, if your entire mix, if you put up the faders and the entire mix seems a little bit dark, don't feel bad about putting a little bit of EQ on your master bus. Okay, it's effectively like putting an EQ on every single track, and think of how much CPU you're saving. One instance versus 50 or 100 or 20 or however many tracks you've got. Okay, and then, so following the big to small or top-down approach, you then will work on your drum bus and your backing vocal bus and your guitar bus and things like that, and you add a little EQ on those. So by the end of your mix, you could get away with, who knows, maybe 5 EQ plugins instead of 50 or, things like that. And so invariably, you're going to wind up with, just what, in my opinion, seems to be a cleaner sounding mix where, you're looking at things from a big picture perspective and not so much sweating about the details. Now, I will warn you, this does get a little bit tricky when it comes to things like compression. So I would be careful, on the master bus, I would be a little more careful about how much EQ you add. And on the individual buses, you could be a little bit more, liberal with what EQ you add. And then on individual tracks, you can be even more liberal with how much EQ you add. Because, for example, if you take a bunch of low end out of your master bus, or if you boost a bunch of top end, that whatever signal it is, let's say you send your snare drum to a compressor, the way that snare drum sounds is going to trigger the compressor differently. And so if you put this on your master, then the compressor on the snare track isn't actually hearing the snare that you're hearing, if that makes sense. So it's what you're hearing is, from the drum bus and from the master bus and that whole chain. But what the compressor is hearing is actually the raw track. The same goes for things like reverb. So let's say you've got a really dull mix, or let's say you had a really harsh mix, and then you put EQ on your master bus and you send that, snare drum again to a reverb. Well, reverbs and compressors and those things react differently based on the tonality of what you're sending them. So you got to be careful. If there's any issues like that, that's best handled on the individual track level. If something's got like an abnormal amount of top end or abnormal amount of harshness or, way too much bottom end, that's something you should probably fix at the individual track level. But don't feel bad about using master bus EQ, especially if it's, a dB or two. That's not going to hurt anything. And don't feel bad about using mix bus EQ and drum bus EQ and vocal bus EQ. Don't feel bad about those things. It's going to be great. It's going to sound fine. So I hope that you find this video really interesting and cool. Like and subscribe, share, and check out the Recording Lounge podcast on iTunes. I'll talk to you guys next time.